So hello and welcome everyone to this webinar about the general principles for coding of medication errors and also other types of deviations from the labeled medicinal product use. So I'm Caroline Wilson and I work as a medical officer excuse me, at the MSSO. I will be your instructor today and I'm supported by my colleague Jane Knight, who was speaking to you before. So together we will take you through this webinar, which will last for about 2 hours. Jane mentioned this already. We would like to make this webinar interactive, so please submit your questions or send us your comments through the question panel that you can find in the control panel on the right hand of your screen. And I will allow as much time as possible for questions, both during the course and at the end of the presentation. But just one remark, do not raise specific coding questions, as we can't help you with individual verbatim terms. We will rather guide you in terms of coding principles. Now, let's start with the presentation. You all know that ICH adopted the development of MedDRA mid of the 1990s and became the owner of the terminology. ICH then, on contract, appointed the MSSO to take care of the maintenance and further development of the terminology based on user feedback, to provide and organize corresponding training as the one we have today, and to administer the MedDRA licensees. All these MSSO activities are overseen by the so-called ICH MedDRA Management Committee. ICH is not only the owner of MedDRA itself, but also owns this training material. It is protected worldwide. You may use the slides with the exception of the MedDRA and ICH logos, but will have to clearly indicate that ICH owns the copyright. Also, any adaptations of the slides have to be clearly labeled. The second bullet point refers to warranty and liability issues you should be aware of. And the third bullet point is not relevant for today because we will not be using any third-party slides. What will we cover today? Let me provide you with an overview. At first, we will explore the regulatory background for today's topic. We will then discuss definitions and terminologies for product use concepts based on the ICH guidance documents. After that, we will look into the general principles for coding of medication errors and then apply these principles in exercises using the MedDRA browser. And we will conclude with a question and answer session as mentioned at the beginning of the session. But we will address your questions throughout the session as well. So please ask questions. This slide now explains about the quiz questions, the polling that we will use during the webinar. The easiest way to join these activities is to scan this QR code with your smartphone, and it will bring you directly to the poll. And as soon as I activate the first question, you'll be able to see it and respond. Or alternatively, you may enter the indicated web address paulf.com into the URL bar at the top of your internet browser in your computer, tablet, or cell phone. And it will then take you to a log on screen and you'll be asked for a username. The poll is completely anonymous, so you don't need to enter your name, but please enter my credentials as a username, that is Carol N. Wills 584 with no spaces, and then click join. I just leave this on the screen for a moment so that you can enter the required information, but you'll see it on each slide that refers to the quizzes later on as well. And Jane has put this information in the chat. She mentioned this already. Also, should you lose connection to the poll during the session, let us know, and I can also show the QR code in between. So just let us know if you lose connection. Now let us try whether it works. Here is the first question. Where are you joining from today? I see Spain, buenos días. I see Greece, Kalimera, India, Scandinavia, also Austria, guten Morgen, good morning to UK and Ireland, merhaba to Turkey, I see. Egypt is there. I'm not speaking Arabic, sorry for that. So many people in Europe, hard to differentiate the different countries now. It's all green, and also colleagues from India joining. So welcome everybody. Nice to meet you all. So now let's get started with our topic today. That is medication errors and other product use issues. And we will first look into the regulatory background because this is an important topic that is in focus of many regulatory authorities around the world. Medication errors are a critical and important problem in healthcare. And they are not only of great importance for the patient concerned, but also have a huge impact on healthcare costs. They represent the most frequent preventable reason for adverse events in the use of medicinal products. And since they are actually preventable, they are in the focus of the regulatory authorities. Depending on countries and regions, they support the recording, coding, reporting, and evaluation of these errors in order to gain new insights into the extent and causes of medication errors. And the intention is, of course, to develop improved strategies for their prevention, to better protect safety, but also to reduce healthcare costs, because the costs that are associated with medication errors could be much better invested in other areas of the healthcare system. The fact that medication errors are in the focus of regulatory authorities is also reflected by new guidances that have been published or are in preparation. You may already be familiar with the good practice guide on recording, coding, reporting, and the assessment of medication errors of the European Medicines Agency. Just one example. The FDA has also published various guidance documents to help avoid medication errors, and you can see some of them here. So many of them deal with evaluation of proprietary names, both for prescription drugs and also non-prescription drugs, biological products, also safety considerations for the product design to minimize medication errors, etc., etc. Some of them still in draft status, but many of them also already released. As stated earlier, regulatory requirements may differ between regions, so make yourself familiar with your local requirements. These are just examples. The regulatory initiatives mentioned have also led to the addition of new terms to MedDRA, together with a restructuring of the hierarchy to better support specific coding, but also subsequent data retrieval and assessment of medication errors and other types of product use issues. And they also led to updates and amendments of the relevant points to consider documents to provide more guidance for these coding scenarios. You may think that this topic is only relevant to the post-marketing sector, but this is not the case. It is also relevant for clinical development, clinical studies. Investigational products used in clinical studies may also be subject for medication errors. And as an example, for instance, the FDA and the Reagan-Udall Foundation of the FDA convened a virtual public meeting on the potential medication error risks with investigational drug container labels. The risk of medication errors related to the content and format of information on investigational drug container labels was explored, the prevalence and nature of medication errors, and also practices, of course, that might minimize the potential for such errors. And the recorded event is still available on the web if you are interested in it. So it's not only a topic for the post-marketing area, it's also relevant for clinical development. Are there any questions so far? Jane?
No, Caroline, no questions so far.
Okay, thank you. So as mentioned already, the PTC documents have also been updated and supplemented to provide more guidance and assistance to MedDRA users on this topic. Let us first look at the MedDRA term selection points to consider document. Here the cover page of the latest version of the document from March 23. And if you look into the document and into the table of contents, you will see that the guidance for medication errors and other product use issues like misuse, abuse, addiction, off-label use, for instance, is quite short. So you see 31 to 41, 10 pages, 2 pages, 2 pages. It's quite short. And this is different with the MedDRA points to consider companion document that provides more detailed information, more examples, and also very detailed guidance on medication errors and the other types of product use concepts. It is a living document that is updated as needed. It is not newly released on 1st of March of each year like the PTC document for MedDRA term selection. So the latest release is from October 2020, and this is shown on the slide here. And if you look into the document, you will see that there is much more detailed explanations and instructions in this document. I can only recommend taking a close look at these 25 pages. They are really very helpful to better understand the terminology and the classification of such events with many practical examples, very useful. Now, let me show you where to find these documents. Here we are. This is the MedDRA website, and if you click on how to use and support documentation, you will be brought to a page, and here the first header is the points to consider documents. If you click on it, you'll see the latest versions of the points to consider document, both the MedDRA term selection points to consider document as well as the companion document. Here they are. And you also would have the possibility to use the shortcut here. So with this shortcut, you will also be brought to this page here. This is where you can find them. Before we go into further details, we will have to familiarize ourselves with the terms that refer to medication errors and other product use errors and issues. Here, a definition of the term medication error. A medication error is any preventable event that may result in the improper use of medication or harm to the patient while the medication is under the control of those involved in the medication process, meaning physicians, pharmacists, nurses, patients, consumers, or their families. The second aspect that is highlighted in green here is important to remember. These errors occur during product use in the medication process, when the product is under the control of the healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. The term does not refer to errors that occur during manufacturing or are caused by wholesalers, for instance, in other words, outside of the control of the healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. Medication and other product use errors may be related to professional practice, the products themselves, and healthcare processes and systems, including prescribing, communication of orders, product labeling, product packaging and nomenclature, preparation of products and their dispensing, distribution and administration, as well as related education and product monitoring. The points to consider document for MedDRA term selection contains a table on page 39 that facilitates a high-level classification of product use errors and problems. And 3 criteria are used for this purpose. Was the deviation intentional, a conscious decision, or did it happen in error? Was it unintentional? And who has caused the event? Who triggered it? The patient or consumer or the healthcare professional? And did it happen in the context of the therapeutic use of the product? Yes or no? So you can see here that misuse, abuse, addiction is always intentional. It's triggered by the patient or consumer, and you see that the misuse occurs in the framework of the context of therapeutic use, whereas abuse, addiction are not related to the therapeutic use of the product. Please note this little asterisk here. So the definitions of misuse in German-speaking countries, for instance, may be very similar to abuse. So these may be more or less considered as synonyms. So this really depends on regions and the use of medical terminology. But in general, it applies to most of the countries that this is that misuse and abuse have to be differentiated from one another. Medication error, of course, not intentional, can be caused by patient consumer or a healthcare professional and also occur in the framework of therapeutic use of the products. And off-label use, always intentional, triggered by the healthcare professional and in the context of therapeutic use of the product for therapeutic purposes. So this is the high-level classification. Let me illustrate these scenarios with some practical examples. So here we have Lisa, and she has stress at work. In the first scenario, the doctor prescribes 1 tablet of a sleeping pill at night to help her sleep better. But since she is still awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, she decides to take another tablet. So this is a conscious decision on her part, a deviation from the prescribed treatment regimen for therapeutic purposes. In other words, an intentional misuse of the medication and intentional drug misuse. In the second scenario, a friend advises her to look for painkillers on the internet to calm down. She orders the medication and takes 1 tablet a day at first, but then continuously increases the dose to 4 tablets a day by now. Here we also have a conscious decision by Lisa to take these painkillers to calm down, so she deviates from the actual therapeutic indication and gradually takes too much of them. This constitutes a product abuse, here a drug abuse. In the third scenario, Lisa does not tolerate the sleeping pill. She is dazed after waking up. So the doctor prescribes her a painkiller off-label instead. Here we have a conscious decision by the doctor for therapeutic purposes, and we also know that this is an off-label use for an unapproved indication. An off-label use of the product, the medication, here it is. Please note that the 3 criteria which are needed for the high-level classification as off-label use are met. But for coding purposes, additional information is needed to finally code to an LLT under PT off-label use. Off-label use has to be explicitly mentioned in the verbatim and in the case in order to be able to code this information accordingly. Why? Well, off-label use refers to the unapproved use of an approved drug in a specific country. And this information is not available for coders in most instances. So it's really in responsibility of the product experts to make this decision whether something is an off-label use, yes or no. So coders shouldn't make that decision unless off-label use is explicitly reported, contained in the verbatim. And related guidance can be found in both the PTC document for MedDRA term selection and the PTC companion document. and we will come back to this later on as well. And finally, in the fourth scenario, Lisa suffers from forgetfulness due to the stress she is experiencing at her workplace. She also forgets that she has already taken her medication one day and takes it a second time. So this is unintentional, but happens in the context of therapeutic use. Now, this scenario represents a medication error. The following flowchart visualizes this decision-making process. So here at first are the three core questions: intentional or accidental, triggered by whom, and in the context of the therapeutic use of the medicinal product, yes or no. Let us assume that the unapproved product use took place intentionally. This may be decided by either a healthcare professional or a patient consumer. If this is a conscious decision by the healthcare professional and for therapeutic purposes, we classify these events as off-label use. These three criteria are required for the high-level classification as an off-label use. But remember, additional information is needed to finally code to an LLT under PT off-label use. Off-label use terms should only be selected when off-label use is specifically mentioned in the reported verbatim information. If an intentional deviation from the product information originates from the patient or consumer and happens in the therapeutic setting, we classify this as an intentional product misuse. And if the deviation does not occur within the therapeutic use of the product, the deviation is classified as drug abuse or drug addiction dependence. Now, the next scenario, if the unapproved product use is unintentional, accidental, this can also be caused by both the healthcare professionals or patient consumers. If this occurs in the context of the therapeutic use of the relevant product, it is classified as medication or product use error. So this is the decision chart that reflects the table that we saw before. You may now argue that in many cases it is not clear whether such a deviation was intended or unintended. Here you can see an example for such a scenario. It is reported that the patient took an extra tablet before going to bed. If no further information is available, we do not know the background here. Did the patient misunderstand the doctor's instructions or the package leaflet? This would then represent a medication error. Or did the doctor mistakenly give her the wrong schedule with a prescription? This would also represent a medication error, in this instance a prescribing error. Or is the patient's discomfort getting worse at bedtime, and so she decided to take one more tablet? This scenario would constitute an intentional drug misuse. Or did the doctor decide to use the drug off-label because he was convinced that the treatment would be more effective this way? So our case information here, the verbatim, does not allow for any of these classifications. So what can be done when getting similar reports for coding purposes and when no further information can be obtained? Now, for coding such scenarios, MedDRA contains very vague, non-specific PTs. If it is not clear whether such an event happened by mistake or intentionally, a suitable LLT under the PT product use issue can be used, a very general term. And if it is not clear whether an intentional deviation from proper product use happens for therapeutic reasons, a suitable LLT under the PT intentional product use issue can be selected. So these are the vague terms that can be used when no further information is available in a quite vaguely reported incident. So therefore, our flowchart has to be expanded with these two neutral, more general terms shown before. And you can see the question marks here now. If it cannot be clarified whether an intentional deviation from the label by the patient or consumer happens for therapeutic reasons or not, an appropriate LLT under PT intentional product use issue should be assigned. And if it cannot be clarified whether an unapproved product use by a healthcare professional or patient consumer occurred by mistake or intentionally, an appropriate LLT under the PT product use issue should be assigned. These two are quite vague terms, but you'll find other more specific terms in MedDRA for dose or schedule deviations, which are to speak neutral because they do not contain the information accidental or intentional. They can be chosen in combination with other MedDRA terms for intentional misuse, off-label use, or medication errors, and allow us to capture the details of what actually happened when no suitable combination term can be found in MedDRA. So in this screenshot from the MedDRA browser, you can see some of these neutral PTs, like for instance, extra dose administered or inappropriate schedule of product administration, or product administered to patient of inappropriate age, product administration interrupted, or product dose omission issue, all quite vague terms. Are there any questions, Jane?
No, Caroline, we've just had a question. Oh, one's just popped in. We've had a question about off-label use, but I suggest we wait until later for that one.
Yeah.
We've got another one here for off-label use as well. So should we, the new one is about off-label as well. Should we wait until that section later?
Yeah, we will address it in more detail in a minute. Yeah, and then we can discuss the questions as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. In order to search for and select suitable MedDRA terms for verbatims that relate to unapproved product use, so deviations from the approved product information, the label, it is relevant to understand MedDRA structure and rules, and also, of course, the details of the PTC guidance documents. But it is also important to make yourself familiar with the MSSO MedDRA browsing tools or your own in-house MedDRA browsers. I will now use the web-based browser to show you where to find the relevant terms and make you familiar with their hierarchy. So let me switch screens now. Here we are again on the MedDRA website. Here I have a shortcut to the web-based browser. I need my MedDRA ID and my password, and then I can log in. And here we are. So when talking about medication errors, you see you have to first look into the injury, poisoning, and procedural complications system organ class. Here you find the HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and issues. And if you open it, you'll see that there is a grouping in HLT for accidental exposures to product. We also have a miscellaneous grouping, medication errors, product use errors, and issues not elsewhere classified. And then you have HLTs that relate to the stages of the medication process, like administration, dispensing, monitoring, preparation, prescribing, selection, storage, transcribing, and communication. Also, we have an HLT for product confusion errors and issues. So these is the content of the medication errors and other product use errors and issues, HLGT. Then we have a separate HLGT for off-label uses and intentional product misuses, use issues. Here you have the intentional product misuses. Here they are: intentional device misuse, intentional misuse by drug delivery system, then a PT for intentional product misuse and intentional product misuse to child. Here we have the more vague terms, intentional product use issues, where it's not clear whether the intentional deviation from the label occurred for therapeutic purposes, yes or no. So intentional device use issue, intentional dose omission, intentional product use issue, etc. And then under the same HLGT, also the off-label uses, off-label use and off-label use of device, because you saw off-label use is also an intentional deviation, but it's an intentional deviation by the healthcare professional for therapeutic purposes. Another HLGT groups overdoses and underdoses, NEC, again, not elsewhere classified. All the terms that relate to overdoses and underdoses that cannot be classified as intentional overdose or accidental overdose or underdose, for instance. So here we are. If I open it, overdoses NEC, you see the intentional overdose. Why is it here? Intentional overdose could mean that it's an off-label use. It could also be something else, a misuse by a patient. That's why it is grouped here, because it needs further information in order to classify more specifically. Then the very vague term overdose, prescribed overdose, same is true here. Prescribed overdose could be a medication error behind by the patient, by the healthcare professional, or it could be an off-label use. We need more information to classify in a more detailed, in a more specific way. And radiation overdose. And the same PTs you find for the underdoses. So here we are. And you see here in this HLG, this is really the one that is used more often. The administration errors in issues, when you open them, you see that you have a lot of granularity here on PT level already. So it's really useful to make yourself familiar with the terminology used and what the differences are between these terms. And for this, the MedDRA concept descriptions are really helpful. Here you have a link to the MedDRA concept descriptions on the top of the browser. If you click on them, you see they are grouped in an alphabetical order. And starting with A, you see the abuse definition here. And this is exactly what we have discussed before when discussing the decision chart. The same holds true for addiction. And if I go to the M here, medication error, again, the same definition as we saw before. And when misuse for the purposes of term selection and analysis of MedDRA coded data, misuse is the intentional use for a therapeutic purpose by a patient or consumer of a product. Over the counter or prescription, no difference, other than prescribed or not in accordance with the authorized product information. So you find all these definitions in here as well. The same holds true for off-label use. Also the aspect that when recording off-label use, consider that product information and or regulations, requirements may differ between regulatory regions. Of course, you always have to consider that. And what else do we have? Overdose, for instance. Here we are. For the purposes of term selection and analysis of MedDRA coded data, overdose is more than the maximum recommended dose in quantity and or concentration. In other words, an excessive dose. And when looking at the underdose definition, you see for the purposes of term selection and analysis of MedDRA coded data, underdose is the administration of less than the minimum recommended dose, again in quantity and or concentration. What is also relevant to realize is that there is a difference between dosage and dose. So a dose is a quantity to be administered at one time. So one dose to be given to the patient or taken by the patient, such as a specified amount of medication, one dose at one time. Whereas dosage is much broader. Dosage refers to the determination and regulation of the size, so the dose, but also the frequency, the schedule of administration, and the number of doses, meaning the duration of the therapy. It's a broader term that refers to the whole administration scheme, not only the dose, but also the schedule and the duration of the therapy. Important to remember and not to confuse both terms. So we had here the injury sock, but we will, let me close this, collapse all. Let's look into the psychiatric disorders. We are still looking for the abuse and dependence terms. And if we look into the psychiatric disorders, we see in HLGT psychiatric disorders NEC, again, not elsewhere classified. And here we have the substance-related and addictive disorders, HLT. And here we have all the abuse and dependence terms. Drug abuse, drug dependence, also differentiated, very specific ones, antepartum, postpartum, etc., etc. So here in the psychiatric disorders, you find the abuse and dependence term. Let me switch back to my presentation. So here again, a reminder what we have just seen in the browser, the concept descriptions, and the hierarchy of the relevant terms in the injury SOC and also in the psychiatric disorders. So what kind of terms can we find under HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and problems? We can find PTs for certain types of errors, such as wrong drug, wrong patient, or wrong route. They can be selected together with, for example, PT prescribing error if no combination term is available. And terms that link an error to a stage in the medication use process, such as the prescribing stage. In addition, there are terms for intercepted errors, prevented by third-party intervention so that they didn't reach the patient. So an error occurred in an earlier stage of the medication process, but was prevented from reaching the patient by a third party. MedDRA also contains two PTs that describe the possibility of an error or signal a circumstance that could potentially lead to a medical device use error or medication error, as well as the vague PTs that I've already addressed before, which can be used when it is unclear whether the reported incident was due to an error or happened intentionally, or when it is unclear whether an intentional deviation from the label by the patient or consumer occurred in the context of therapeutic use. So now the next question for you. What is reported here is that a dose taken was below the minimum recommended dose in the product label. Remember the concept description that I've shown earlier? So how would you approach this verbatim? Dose taken was below the minimum recommended dose in the product label. Would this represent an underdose or an accidental underdose? Would you just code it to drug administration error because the drug was taken? Or would you select incorrect dosage administered? Again, remember the concept descriptions that we looked at before. I see that you're still voting. Let me show you the QR code again, just in case. Let's see what you're going for. So most of you are going for underdose, but we have a split of opinions here. Incorrect dosage administered would also be an option for some of you, or drug administration error, or accidental underdose. So let me close the poll here. So what do we have here? Based on the concept description, it's below the minimum recommended dose in the product label. It means it's an underdose. It is an underdose based on this concept description. What we see here is an underdose. And we do not have any information whether this was an intentional deviation, so whether this underdose was taken intentionally or whether it was an error. So you are right, underdose, the unspecified underdose would be the correct assignment here. Drug administration error would be much too vague. It does not capture the fact that this was an administration of an underdose. Accidental underdose would be an interpretation because we don't have this information. And again, remember, dosage refers not only to a dose, so a single dose, but also to the schedule and duration of treatment. So this would be much too broad for what has been reported in our verbatim. So the correct answer here is underdose. So most of you have voted for this LLT. Well done. Next one.
Caroline, we've had a couple of questions on this example of overdose and underdose. How can you so the first one was that should overdose or underdose be always coded together with a medication error or misuse or off-label, whatever it may be, depending upon the details of the case?
No, I don't think so. It really depends. If you have if you have an off-label use, for instance, by the doctor because of certain specifics of the patient's health status, it would be an off-label use. Then you would just select an LLT that refers to a single dose under the off-label PT, and it would be sufficient.
Yes. So yeah. It depends on what's reported, doesn't it?
Yeah, you wouldn't split code in this instance. It would be sufficient to have it under a specific LLT, under off-label use or intentional drug misuse whatsoever.
And then we've had a couple of questions that I don't know if you want to address now. It's asking for differentiation. Could you help explain the difference between drug addiction and drug abuse? That's one question. And then also, and that's similar, could you explain the difference between dose, cumulative dose, total dose, and dosage?
So the dosage I've explained. Cumulative dose really refers to a medication where the medication is taken several times a day, for instance, and then you would have a cumulative dose over time. So that's the cumulative dose. What was the other cumulative dosage? Dose is a single dose?
Total dose and dosage form.
Total dose would need more context information in order to interpret what is meant by total dose. Whether total dose per day, then it would, if a drug is taken 3 times a day, the total dose per day would be the addition of these 3 single doses.
Thank you. And then the related question was about the difference between drug addiction and drug abuse.
Yep. Let's go back to our concept description. Addiction. For the purposes of term selection and analysis of MedDRA-coded data, addiction is an overwhelming desire by a patient or consumer to take a drug for non-therapeutic purposes, together with inability to control or stop its use despite harmful consequences. So addiction can occur because drug induces physical dependence and consequently a withdrawal syndrome, but this is not an essential feature, and addiction can occur because of a desire to experience the drug's psychological, behavioral, or physical effects. So that's the addiction. Dependence. It's a bodily psychological dependence on the drug. Whereas the abuse is also intentional non-therapeutic use by a patient or consumer of a product for a perceived reward or desired non-therapeutic effect, including but not limited to getting high. So it may occur with a single use, sporadic use, or persistent use of the product. So the difference here is really the physical dependence, psychological dependence. You cannot stop taking this drug, although you know that you may suffer harmful consequences. That's the difference.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you. And we've had a response. Thank you from the inquirer. So thank you very much, Caroline.
So then let's start with the next question. Inadvertently took excessive dose of the prescribed pills. Again, remember the concept descriptions that we saw before. How would you approach this verbatim now? Inadvertently took excessive dose of the prescribed pills. Incorrect dose administered, overdose, accidental dose increase, or accidental overdose. How would you classify this verbatim? We always try to code as specifically as possible, covering the full information. Here we know it was inadvertent deviation. We know it was an excessive dose. Okay, let's see what you are going for again. Accidental overdose is majority of you have voted for this one, and this is completely correct. We know it was an accidental deviation, so it was inadvertently taken, and excessive dose is exactly what has been mentioned in the concept description for overdose. So what we are looking at here is an overdose, and it was taken accidentally. Accidental overdose would be the correct assignment. Accidental dose increase would capture the accidental nature, but it's not just a dose increase, it's really an overdose that is taken accidentally. And overdose would be correct in terms of excessive dose, but what is missing here is the information that is contained in our verbatim that it was an accidental deviation. And incorrect dose administered would be too vague. Yes, it is an incorrect dose, but we know it was accidental, and we know it was not just an incorrect dose, but it was an overdose. So well done. Accidental overdose is the correct code assignment here. Do we have questions for this one as well, Jane?
No additional questions. No, thank you, Caroline.
So now we have made ourselves familiar with the classification of medication errors and other types of product use issues, and we will now have a look at some general principles for coding of medication errors. First, just a short reminder regarding the basic rules to be followed for coding with MedDRA. So the quality of the reported information and the extraction of the relevant information during data entry are, of course, a basic requirement for good and meaningful coding. So if the information received is too vague or ambiguous, of poor quality, ask for clarification, query. Coding is done at the LLT level, and the LLT that most accurately, most specifically reflects the reported incidents and events should always be selected. Nothing should be interpreted, added, and no relevant information should be omitted. This is the basic rule, code as reported. And of course, only current LLTs should be used for coding. For coding product use errors and problems, the following tips may be helpful. First and foremost, you should be familiar with the MedDRA concept descriptions and the PTC guidances so that you know where to find more detailed information, more guidance to achieve accurate and consistent coding. You should also have good knowledge of the MedDRA structure and hierarchy, particularly in SOC injury, poisoning, and procedural complications. I've shown you the hierarchy before. Once you have found a potentially appropriate LLT and PT for the reported incident, check if the placement of the selected LLT and PT accurately reflects the reported event. That's one of the basic MedDRA coding rules. Check the hierarchy to make sure that you really capture the correct concept. And it is best to search the MedDRA hierarchy top-down when coding medication errors and other product use concepts, unless you are already really very experienced in coding such incidents. You just have to make yourself familiar with the hierarchy and the PTs that are contained in the HLTs when starting coding medication errors and other product use concepts. And finally, if you can't find a specific term for medicines, vaccines, or medical devices, look out for a product term, so a more general term, product, and related use concepts. Unless you, so if you find, of course, a very specific term for a vaccine or a drug, you would use it. But if you don't find it, just select a product term that would be suitable for your coding task, because you want to capture the actual medication error or product use concept, and it's not so relevant to know that it was a drug or a vaccine. Of course, you need to differentiate between medical device and drug or vaccine if possible. But if not possible, try to capture the specific error or use issue with a product term. So now we are coming to the general principles for coding of medication errors. And the companion document I've shown you before that provides really very detailed guidance. This companion document specifies some principles for coding medication and other product use errors. First of all, when to use the PT medication error, when to select more than one term, when to do split coding, when to use the PT off-label use, how to capture potential and intercepted medication errors, how to capture both the specific type of error and the stage of the medication use system where the error occurred, when to capture the root cause for medication errors, and that we should not infer a medication error when coding. And we will address these principles one by one. The first principle refers to the use of PT medication error. As coders, we should not use this term unless we have no further information reported in the case. If you have further information, then search the hierarchy under HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and issues and select the most specific LLT that you can find. And if a specific error is reported, but no suitable term can be found, then please submit a change request to get a better term and assign the LLT that represents the best, so to say, approximation to the reported incident as a placeholder. Here an example. If it is only reported that a patient inadvertently didn't use the medication as prescribed and no further information is available or becomes available, then of course LLT medication error can be selected, which is grouped under the same PT medication error. Sometimes you will get a report of a chain of events where an initial error leads to additional subsequent errors or even adverse events in the patient. Then code the initial error as the priority, and all subsequent errors and adverse events have to be coded in addition as reported. But please do not use multiple LLTs to represent one singular incident that is reported with both a general and a specific description in the reported term, the verbatim. This is in line with a general rule for coding of combination terms that refer to a general medical disorder that is further specified. As an example, for instance, if an arrhythmia is reported that is specified as atrial fibrillation in the given verbatim, one would only code the atrial fibrillation. And the same holds true here for the medication errors as well. If a medication error is reported that is further specified as a dose increase, accidental dose increase, or whatsoever, you would, of course, capture the accidental nature and the specific error. And there's no need, if you can capture everything, to code medication error in addition. Always code as specifically as possible. Again, an example for this principle: it is reported that a nurse miscalculated the dose and the patient received 40 milligram instead of 20 milligram of his medication, and he then experienced severe hypotension. So here we would capture the initial error with the LLT dose calculation error, same PT, plus the subsequent administration error with the LLT incorrect dose administered, because the calculation error then led to an administration error. And of course also the resulting adverse event in the patient, the hypotension. It is a chain of events starting with a dose calculation error that leads to the administration of an incorrect dose and finally to an adverse reaction in the patient, a hypotension. Any questions?
No, Caroline, no new questions on this.
Next principle refers to off-label use, and we had questions related to this topic already. So let's go into more details here. Always consider the criteria and information required to select a term under PT off-label use. So off-label use relates to situations where a healthcare professional intentionally prescribes, dispenses, or recommends a product for a medical purpose, and this purpose or the dose whatsoever is not in accordance with the authorized product information of the respective country. It has to be an HCP, it has to be intentional and for a medical purpose in the context of therapeutic use. These are the criteria that must be met for the high-level classification. The highlighted sentence added in the latest version of the meta-term selection points to consider document is copied exactly from the latest release. As a coder, off-label use terms should only be selected when off-label use is specifically mentioned in the reported verbatim information. Coder should not take this decision when only the three criteria are met, because it needs more specific product knowledge and information about the country of origin of the reported case. Local regulations and the product information may differ, of course, between regulatory regions. And I have to say that regulators are very clear on this, and you'll see that in all examples of off-label use in the PTC documents, the off-label use is clearly named in the wording. Let us look at an example. It is reported that a pediatrician decided to use COVID-19 vaccine off-label for his 10-year-old high-risk patient, although not yet approved for this age group. Does this verbatim fulfill the criteria for classification as off-label use? And is off-label use explicitly mentioned? So an HCP has caused the deviation. It was a pediatrician. He did it intentionally, he decided to do so, and based on therapeutic considerations, because he wanted to protect his 10-year-old patient from an infection. And we are told that he decided to use the COVID-19 vaccine off-label, meaning that the vaccine is approved for immunization against COVID-19 infection in the respective country, but not for this age group. So the most specific LLT for this scenario is LLT off-label use in unapproved age group under PT off-label use. Now we come to the questions, Jane.
Yes, so if within a company, the core company's data sheet is used for expectedness in the safety database, and it turns out that the given indication is off-label, but this is not explicitly stated by the healthcare provider, can we not use the LLT of off-label use in the coding? And then we had a very similar question, which just pointed out that it's rare that the reports, most often the reports do not specifically mention the term off-label use in ICSR verbatims. However, it's clear that it has been prescribed like this, and as a marketing authorization holder, you need to collect all the information to be reported, for example, in your PSURs. So these are two similar questions. I've addressed them in the text, but you might want to just reinforce for the rest of the audience.
Yeah. So, as I said, it's an addition. It is made fully clear in both documents, the companion document and in the MedDRA term selection points to consider document, that coders should not take this decision. So it really then depends on the processes that you have in your own company. So mostly the best person to really classify as off-label use is the product expert in safety, for instance. So this person will know the approval status for each country in the world. Coders usually do not have that information, and that is why the information alone that something is intentional by HCP for therapeutic reasons is not sufficient in order to classify as off-label use, because for this classification as a coder, you would need the country of origin of the case. You would need to have the information about the approval status for that respective product you are looking at in that respective country. And depending on your processes, if you have a centralized coding organization, you don't have this information. You don't know the country of origin for the ICSR. You may not even know the product that is the product name for this ICSR, the suspect drug, etc., etc. And that's why this addition, this specification, this explanation was added to the documents. If your processes are set up in a way that coders have the full information because they have full access to the ICSR that was reported, they may even process the case and do the coding in addition. And if they have for the respective product all the information about the country approval status of the country, for instance, then they may be able to take this decision. But it really depends on the processes that you have in place. Mostly, as far from my experience, I was heading a centralized coding organization. We had some additional information about gender of the case, age, and also the product of the ICSR, the suspect drug or suspect drug product. But we did not have, our coders did not have the information about the approval status, for instance. I hope that I could clarify.
Yes, thank you, Caroline. We've had some comments back. That does help. The explanation helps. It's worth spending the time. And just to reinforce that, a couple of comments have said that it rarely comes in with off-label use reported in the verbatim. Yeah. That's something we've had. Yes. I'm not sure if the question is in scope, so thank you for that. I'll move on to another topic now. Do physicians expose themselves to legal vulnerability for including off-label use drug use in their clinical practice, particularly if the patient experiences an adverse reaction related to an off-label drug use? I'm not sure that's really part of code.
Sorry, I'm not a lawyer.
No, I don't think so. Okay.
I'm
But,
I have to be very cautious to give legal.
I agree, Caroline. But interesting thought. But we'll
Yes,
pass
interesting
on
thought.
answering that one today.
But it's really usually no. But in oncology, for instance, off-label use is quite often used. Yeah, you have to have good arguments and have to refer to literature because of approval status of some chemotherapy, or especially the antibodies. They are behind from the actual clinical use of certain products. Yeah, so it depends on how you can argue about your decision to use something off-label for your patients.
That's good. That's interesting, Caroline. Thank you very much. No other questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. So then let's continue with the potential medication errors. Such incidents should also be captured, and MedDRA has 2 PTs for doing so. First of all, the LLT, circumstance or information capable of leading to medication errors, same PT, and the LLT, circumstance or information capable of leading to device use error, again, same PT. In addition, MedDRA terms that help capturing the contributing factors should also be selected, like for instance, LLT drug label lookalike. Question is, why do some regulators want to receive this information? Are actually really very keen to receive such information. In such scenarios, no medication error happened yet, but could of course occur in the near future based on the reported contributing factors like drug name confusion, etc. When understanding the background of these for these potential errors, regulators can already take steps to prevent errors before happening. And that's why they are interested in receiving such information. So depending on your local requirements, do not omit such information, but capture all relevant information when receiving similar verbatims, and code both the potential for an error by selecting one of these PTs, and also code the contributing factor or factors if reported. So here again an example. A pharmacist reported that the blurred print on the drug label could lead to the wrong dose being given, or no, could lead to a medication error. No medication error occurred yet, but the pharmacist saw a circumstance that the blurred print on the label that could lead to a medication error in the future. So remember, we would code the potential error by selecting LLT, circumstance, or information capable of leading to medication error, same PT. And we would also code the contributing scenario, the root cause that could lead to a medication error, here the blurred print on the label, by selecting product label text illegible under PT product label issue. So you should really capture this information so that if some confusion exists because the label text is illegible, font is too small, whatsoever, so that you already signal the potential for a medication error, and then measures could be taken to avoid these medication errors in the future. Next principle. Sometimes medication errors at an earlier stage of the medication use process are prevented from reaching the patient. So a medication error occurred during prescription, preparation of the medication, etc., but is detected and intercepted by an active intervention of another person. When such scenarios are reported, the selected term for the intercepted error should represent the stage where the error actually occurred and not where it was prevented. meaning that when it is reported that a pharmacist dispensed the wrong drug, but the nurse identified the error before giving it to the patient, we should select LLT intercepted drug dispensing error under PT intercepted product dispensing error, capturing the stage where the error actually occurred. We would not code to LLT intercepted administration error because the nurse did nothing wrong. The error occurred at the dispensing stage. Any questions, Jane?
No, Caroline, no questions.
Okay, next one. We already talked about the stages of the medication use system when or process when looking into the HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and issues, and the MedDRA hierarchy underneath. This slide shows the different stages, starting with the storage of the medication, continuing with the prescribing stage, transcribing stage, preparation and dispensing stage, the administration stage, and finally the monitoring stage. One of the principal MedDRA coding rules, code as specifically as possible, capturing the full information of what has been reported, also applies to coding of medication errors, of course, meaning that if a specific error is reported that occurred at a specific stage, like the transcribing stage, for instance, we should capture the full information, the type of error, and the stage where the error occurred. You'll see that MedDRA contains many terms that capture both the type of error and the stage, like for instance LLT, wrong drug prescribed. So here you have the type of error, wrong drug, and the stage, the prescribing stage. Other MedDRA terms only capture the type of error, like wrong drug or wrong dose. So if the stage where this error occurred is unknown, you can just select the LLTs for the type of error. And others capture the stage only, like drug prescribing error or drug dispensing error. Again, if the error is not specified, you would just select an LLT to capture the stage where the error occurred. So always capture both the stage and the type of error where it is known. And if the stage is not known, use terms for the type of error only. And if the type of error is unknown, then capture the stage only. But always try to capture as much information as possible when coding. When both the stage and the type of error are reported, you would look for a combination term in MedDRA and use a single LLT to capture the full information, when possible, as shown in the first example on this slide here. When it is reported that the pharmacy dispensed the wrong drug, the LLT wrong drug dispensed would capture the full information. Here there is no need to assign two codes like LLT wrong drug and LLT drug dispensing error, because we can capture the full information with one term. But sometimes you may not find a suitable combination term. If it is reported that the doctor mistakenly prescribed the wrong strength, you would have to split to capture the reported information in full by assigning LLT wrong strength and LLT drug prescribing error. So again, you would capture the type of error and the stage where the error occurred. And because you cannot find a combination term, a suitable combination term, here split coding would be necessary. We already shortly addressed the root causes when talking about potential medication errors. If a medication error is reported in conjunction with the actual cause of this error, then always select a term for the root cause plus the resulting error. Remember what we discussed earlier. Root causes are critical to understand why an error occurred and to identify interventions that can be undertaken to prevent this error. And that is why many regulators are very interested in obtaining information about these root causes. The next example describes such a case. A doctor wrote a description for 40 milligrams of drug X for angina pectoris every 6 hours. But because of the illegibility of the prescription, and you see this here, the nurse administered the same dose of drug Y, a calcium channel blocker used in the treatment of hypertension, for which the maximum daily dose is only 10 milligrams. So because of the error made, the patient received 160 milligrams of this calcium channel blocker per day, 4 times 40 milligrams. And a day after taking the first 4 overdoses of the calcium channel blocker, the patient suffered a heart attack and died. So what needs to be captured here? The angina pectoris in the medical history of the patient or its indication for use. Then the illegible written prescription. The resulting medication errors, the administration of the wrong drug, and the accidental overdose, and the resulting adverse reaction in the patient, the heart attack. Fatal outcome would be captured in a separate database field. So remember, it is very important to capture the root cause if reported. Any questions related to the last few slides?
No,
Okay.
Nothing directly related, Caroline. Thank you.
And here, the last principle that we will discuss today, do not infer a medication error. Remember another basic rule for coding with MedDRA. Code as reported, do not add or subtract relevant medical information. The same rule also applies to the coding of medication errors, of course. If you receive a verbatim that describes a deviation from the label, an unauthorized use of a product, only select an LLT or LLTs that reflect what has been reported. Do not assume that a medication or device use error occurred if this is not made clear in the verbatim. So if it is reported that a nurse administered 50 milligrams of drug X, do not assume that this is a medication error. Try to obtain more information about the reporter or find out the dose range referencing the prescribing information of the respective drug. So try to clarify the background of this verbatim, because otherwise it's not an informative report at all. And here is a nice summary, a visual presentation of the different types of medication error cases taken from the good practice guide from the EMA. In the first example, a medication error occurs, here it is, leading to an administration error, so it reaches the patient, and to harm in the patient. Next, an error happens, it reaches the patient, but no harm occurs. Next, an error happens, but it's intercepted by a third-party intervention. So this is an intercepted error. And finally, a potential error is described, where it is reported that there is a risk for a medication error in the product use process due to special circumstances, a special root cause like drug name confusion or drug packaging confusion, for instance, but no error occurred yet. So a potential error. Any further questions before continuing?
No, it's a quiet group today, Caroline.
Yes. So in the last part of this webinar, we will now work together on 5 examples to apply the previously introduced decision chart and also the general principles for coding medication errors and other product use concepts that we just discussed. At first, you will have to assess the reported information. And first check for the 3 criteria for the classification. Did the incident occur intentionally or accidentally? Who has caused it? HCP or patient consumer? And was there a therapeutic purpose? Then check at which stage the error occurred and whether it led to subsequent errors and even harm in the patient. If contributing factors are reported, they need to be captured in addition. Or was the report referring to circumstances that could lead to a medication error? Or was the error intercepted before reaching the patient? Because the type of report, the type of information that you get will influence the way you search for appropriate terms. It will help you find the most suitable LLTs, the closest matches. Here our first example. It is reported that the nurse forgot to administer the second of 2 chemotherapy treatments to the patient. So what can we take from this report? Is it reported whether it was accidental or intentional? Yes, we know that the incident happened accidentally. The nurse forgot. Do we know who caused it? Yes, an HCP, a nurse. And was it in the framework of therapeutic use of the product? Yes, it was. We also know the stage where the error occurred, but we don't have any root cause in this instance. So how would you approach this verbatim? Which LLT would you select? Nurse forgot to administer the second of 2 chemotherapy treatments to the patient. Scheduled daily dosing taken less frequently, drug dose omission in error, drug use for unapproved schedule, or temporary interruption of therapy. As always, you have multiple options. Look at the verbatim and try to capture as much of this information as possible. Without adding or omitting any information. So let's look what you are going for. Drug dose omission in error seems to be the favorite decision. Schedule daily dosing taken less frequently, also drug dose omission or temporary interruption of therapy. So here we are. Now let's apply our decision chart. We know that the incident occurred in error. We know that it was caused by the nurse, an HCP. And we know that it occurred in the framework of therapeutic use. So the incident has to be classified as medication error. Now let's have a look into the browser to find the best terms. Let me switch to the browser. And if we look into the SOC injury, let's close the psychiatric here. Here we have the injury SOC. Here we have the medication errors and other product use errors and issues. And we are looking at the stage of the administration of the product. So we will have to search in the HLT product administration errors and issues. And here we find the product dose omission in error and also the product dose omission issue. Accidental use, drug dose omission in error, forgot to take product, missed dose in error, and here the more vague term product dose omission issue that would be selected if it's not clear whether something occurred in error or intentionally, such a drug dose omission. So here these are the vague terms. But here in our case we know that the drug dose omission happened in error. So drug dose omission in error would be the best code assignment here. Some of you voted for the inappropriate schedule of product administration. Here it is. So you see that terms like once daily dose taken more frequently or less frequently, for instance, these LLTs would be selected when it is reported that dose omissions occur regularly, take place more often, like when a patient takes a once daily dose less frequently. LLT drug use for unapproved schedule. Let's look for that one. Here it is. If I click on it, the term details window opens, and you see it's grouped under product use issue. So the very vague term, it's a vague LLT. It's grouped under HLT, medication errors, product use errors, and issues, NEC, so does not represent an administration error. So this would be an incorrect assignment. And therapy interruption, here we are, therapy interrupted. Go to browser. You see it's grouped in surgical and medical procedures. Here it is. Many PTs under this HLT, obviously. It's therapeutic procedures, NEC. So here we have our PT, therapy interrupted, temporary interruption of therapy. LLTs under this PT should only be used when a therapy was interrupted due to reasons that are not under the control of the HCP or patient consumer, like supply, insurance, or financial issues, etc. For instance, product availability issues, or when a patient cannot afford the medication. So it would not be suitable for our scenario. Go back to my slides. Here we are. Here you have the 5 LLTs. So the correct assignment would be drug dose omission in error. Most of you have voted for this one. You see the scheduled daily dose and taken less frequently is under inappropriate schedule of product administration. Here 1 dose was missed in error. So it's not a schedule issue. And drug dose omission would be too vague. We know it happened accidentally. Drug use for unapproved schedule is a very vague term, does not relate to an administration error or issue. And we also said that it is not a schedule issue in this instance, but just 1 drug dose omission. And temporary interruption of therapy, again, is not appropriate. So the correct term would be drug code assignment would be drug dose omission in error, under PT product dose omission in error, and most of you voted for this term, so well done. Any questions, Jane?
No, Caroline, no questions.
Okay, then I hope that it was fully clear. Next example. Here it is reported that the patient did not read instructions thoroughly and took drug X for prophylaxis instead of treatment of the approved indication. So what do we know based on the information provided? Again, was it accidental or intentional? We know. The incident happened accidentally. The patient did not read the instructions thoroughly enough. Do we know who caused it? Yes, the patient. And was it in the framework of therapeutic use of the product? Yes, it was. We also know the stage where the error occurred. The drug was administered, but no root cause was provided again. So what would you do with this one now? Patient did not read instructions thoroughly and took drug X for prophylaxis instead of treatment of the approved indication. Drug use for unapproved indication, unintentional use for unapproved indication, product leaflet instructions confusion, off-label use in unapproved indication, and or drug administration error. So split coding may also be needed in some instances when looking at our examples. Remember, we should always capture the stage where the error occurred and the type of error. Let's see that we already received 60 responses here. Let's see what you're going for. So most of you are going for unintentional use for unapproved indication and drug administration errors, but also product leaflet instructions confusion. Let me close the poll. Here we are. Oops. So you can see everything. Drug use for unapproved indication, unintentional use for unapproved indication is one of the favorites. Product leaflet instruction confusion also. Off-label use, some of you voted for this one, and drug administration error. So let's again look at our verbatim and use our decision chart. We know that the incident happened accidentally. We know that it was caused by the patient, and we know that it was in the context of therapeutic use, so meaning that this verbatim describes a medication error. So let me now again search for the most specific terms in the browser. Let's switch to the browser again, and I will use the search field here in this instance, and I will enter indication and administration. Nothing. Then let me use for check for use, indication and use. Here we get some hits, and among those we have the unintentional use for unapproved indication, capturing the accidental nature of the incident, plus the LLT drug use for unapproved indication, which is more vague. Drug use for unapproved indication is more vague. You see it's grouped under the NEC, medication errors, product use errors, and issues NEC HLT, whereas the unintentional use for unapproved indication is grouped also under this NEC HLT, but is more specific because it captures the accidental nature of the incident. But as you can see in the hierarchy here, we do not capture the stage where this error occurred. So the administration stage. So that's that this drug was finally administered for an unapproved indication. So here it would be necessary to split code to capture the full information and to select drug administration error in addition. And of course there is a drug administration error. If I look into the injury SOC here again, here we are, the administration errors, product administration error, here we are, and here we have the drug administration error, LLT. So both we have to split code, we have to assign two codes in this instance in order to capture the full information, and we saw that for capturing the specific type of deviation from the label, we could use unintentional use for unapproved indication or drug use for unapproved indication. So these two were available in order to capture not the stage, but the type of error. Off-label use in unapproved indication is here available as well. It's of course grouped under off-label use, but remember, off-label use is an intentional decision by a healthcare professional for therapeutic reasons. And here a patient consumer was deviating from the label. So it's not an off-label use. And the other option was product leaflet instructions confusion. Here we have the confusion errors and issues, HLT, and you see that we have plenty of PTs underneath: product confusion, product design confusion, product dosage form confusion, dose confusion, label, name confusion, packaging confusion. These terms do not reflect what has been reported because the patient didn't read the instructions thoroughly. It was not reported that the instructions themselves were confusing. So you have to be very cautious when assigning these terms. Here we only know the patient did not read the instructions thoroughly enough, and that's why he made the mistake. it was not reported that the product information was confusing. We switch back. Here we have the hierarchy of the terms in the quiz again. Drug use for unapproved indication would be more vague. Unintentional use for unapproved indication would capture the accidental nature and the type of error, that the drug was taken for an unapproved indication or used for an unapproved indication. But we would need to, in addition, select drug administration error in order to capture the stage where this type of error occurred. You may now say, well, drug use for unapproved indication or unintentional use for unapproved indication makes no difference here because we capture the error, the accidental nature of the deviation by the LLT drug administration error. But I would always try to code as specifically as possible, so would select drug administration error and unintentional use for unapproved indication. But selecting drug use for unapproved indication plus drug administration error would also be somehow correct, but we try to always be as specific as possible. Product leaflet instructions confusion, I explained that why it would not be appropriate to select this term. And off-label use and unapproved indication is incorrect, of course, because off-label use describes an intentional deviation from the label by the HCP in the context of therapeutic use. And here it was the patient who triggered the deviation. So here we are. We would select drug administration error under PT product administration error to capture the stage where this error occurred. And then in order to capture the specifics of the type of error, we would in addition select LLT unintentional use for unapproved indication and under PT unintentional use for unapproved indication. Any questions?
Yes, we have a comment, Caroline. I know you have covered this, but as this time, perhaps you can just go over it again. The use of the term use. So the question or comment was, is the term use not enough in that previous example to capture the stage? Can you explain why there's a difference between use and administration?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that it's important to capture the stage where the error occurred, especially for the errors, because these are in focus of the regulators and of many regulators around the world. And so you would try to capture the stage, and this is one of the principles that you saw before from the companion document. And with the term that is only grouped in the NSC, that's why it's so important to really check the hierarchy of the terms that you consider to select for coding purposes. If you see that your LLT and PT is not grouped under the administration HLT, then of course you would need to also capture the fact that the drug was finally administered, because use would just mean it is used somewhere, maybe at the prescribing stage, or the wrong drug was used at the dispensing stage. It does not tell that this was really an administration error. So always try to capture the stage where an error occurred. And that's why split coding is necessary here. Unintentional use could relate to any other stage in the medication process as well.
That's great. Thank you, Caroline.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else? Oh, yes, one's just arrived. Regarding clinical trials, in case you choose two PTs, it could seem that there are two different medication errors. In case you need to choose only one of them, which would be the most appropriate?
Oh, yeah, I know this problem in clinical studies that sometimes split coding is not possible.
It's not really coding conventions either in relation to medication errors.
You wouldn't have this scenario in clinical studies. In clinical studies, you may have deviations from the schedule or the dose, for instance, in error by the study nurse whatsoever. but you would not have this kind of more complex scenarios. So in clinical studies, you just need to define for all clinical studies what to consider an overdose, what you would consider an underdose, whether everything that is beyond or below what has been defined in the study protocol is considered an over or an underdose, or whether there's a certain range. So this needs to be defined in clinical studies, but usually you would not have this problem in clinical studies here. Yeah, you would not have an unintentional use for unapproved indication unless you have a phase 4 study, maybe.
Thank you, Caroline. That's all at the moment.
Yeah. Next one. A patient took more than the prescribed dose to get a better drug effect. So let's look at this verbatim now. Is it reported whether it was accidental or intentional? Yes. We know that the patient consciously decided to take more than the recommended dose to get a better drug effect. Do we know who caused it? Yes, it was the decision of the patient. And was it in the framework of therapeutic use of the product? Yes, it was. We also know the stage where the error occurred. We know it was administered, but no root cause again was provided. So how would you approach this one here? Patient took more than the prescribed dose to get a better drug effect. Unapproved dose administered, intentional overdose, wrong dose administered, intentional misuse by dose change, incorrect dosage administered. What would you do? It was a conscious decision by the patient to get a better drug effect. Remember the concept descriptions in the browser. Again, we have already 60 votes here. Intentional overdose, intentional misuse by dose changes are the favorite assignments. So let me close the poll again and use our decision chart. So here we have a different scenario. We know that the incident was intentional. We know that it was caused by the patient. And we know that it was for a therapeutic purpose. The patient wanted to have a better drug effect. So meaning that this verbatim describes an intentional product misuse, here an intentional drug misuse. So let me switch to the browser again. Let's check the terms. If I do again a top-down search in SOC injury, let me first collapse everything. Here we have the medication errors and other product use errors and issues. We are not looking at a use issue or medication error. We said it was an intentional drug misuse. And here we have off-label uses and intentional product misuses, use issues. So this would be the correct HLGT to look at. Intentional product misuses, intentional product use issues, off-label uses. So this was not an off-label use. It was triggered by the patient. It's not a use issue, but we know it was an intentional product misuse. So let's look into this HLT. And here we have device product misuse. This would be the PT to look at. And here we have the intentional misuse by dose change. So this would be the best approximation to what has been reported in our case. We know he took more, so there is no intentional misuse by dose increase, for instance, in this instance, but by dose change. So that's the best, the most specific LLT that we can find under PT intentional product misuse. The other option that we had was intentional overdose. Some of you have voted for this one. you find this intentional overdose under the overdoses and underdoses NEC. Here we have them, intentional overdose. But our verbatim alone does not allow for classification as an intentional overdose. So more information about the drug and the labeled dose range would be needed to do so. It was not reported as an excessive dose or as a dose that was beyond the maximum recommended dose for the respective product. So overdose would not be correct in this instance. So here we are. Here again, the unapproved dose administered would be a product use issue, a very general term. Incorrect dosage, again, dosage refers to the whole administration scheme, to the dose, the schedule, and or duration of the therapy. So dosage should only be used as a more general term, and wrong dose administered would yes, the dose was administered, but it was a misuse, an intentional misuse by the patient. So this would need to be captured, and we have a combination term that reflects both the intentional misuse by the patient and that the dose was changed by this patient. Intentional overdose would not be correct. It would be an interpretation. It is no overdose was reported. So here we are. The correct assignment would be intentional misuse by dose change under PT, intentional product misuse. Any questions, Jane?
No questions.
Okay. Next one.
Hold on, Caroline, one's just arrived. What about the stage of administration, and is the phrase more than not enough description for an overdose? More than
the prescribed dose. So the prescribed dose could be on the lower end of the recommended dose range. And if the patient took more, it still may be in the dose range that is allowed in the label. So we don't know. It doesn't say that it is an excessive dose or that it is beyond what is defined in the label. It's just more than the prescribed dose. And we don't know the prescribed dose. Could be a very low dose, so that if the patient took more, would still not fit into the classification overdose. Would be an interpretation.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you, Caroline. Nothing else.
Okay, next exercise. Doctor prescribed drug A off-label to suppress preterm labor after careful risk-benefit assessment. So what does this verbatim tell us? What do we know? Do we know if this was accidental or intentional? Yes, we know that it was a conscious decision. Do we know who caused it, who made it? This decision, yes, it was the doctor in HCP. And was it in the framework of therapeutic use of the product? Yes, it was. All criteria for classification of the incident as off-label use are met. And it is also reported that the doctor used the drug off-label. So we have the full information that we need. We also know the stage where the issue occurred. At the stage of prescribing, the drug was prescribed off-label for a patient suffering preterm labor, but no root cause was provided. So how would you approach this one here? Doctor prescribed drug A off-label for suppression of preterm labor after careful risk-benefit assessment. Think about how to classify this incident and what needs to be captured here. Let's have a look. Off-label use for unapproved indication is the favorite assignment. Drug prescribed for unapproved indication as well, or intentional use for unlabeled indication. So let's look at our decision chart again. We know it was a conscious decision in this instance. It was made after careful risk-benefit assessment. We also know that this decision was made by the HCP, here the doctor, and we know that it was made for therapeutic purpose. So the incident has to be classified as off-label use based on our 3 criteria. And because we are also provided with the information that the doctor prescribed the drug off-label, we can select a suitable term under PT off-label use. So here we are. We have to capture the off-label use and the specifics, the fact that it was for an unapproved indication. So let me close. Here we have the off-label uses under HLGT, off-label uses and intentional product misuses, use issues. If I click on this plus sign here, I have the off-label use PT, and if I look into the LLT content, I see that we have a nice term that really not only captures the off-label use in this instance, but also the off-label use in an unapproved indication. So this would cover all details of the off-label use. Here we are. So drug use for unapproved indication would be very vague, just a use term. We would not capture the fact that this was really an off-label use. It was not a drug prescribing error at all, so it was a conscious decision, an intentional deviation. Drug prescribed for an unapproved indication is grouped under PT product prescribing issue. Again, always check the hierarchy of the LLTs that you think could be suitable. So it's an issue term. It's a very vague term because the prescription for an unapproved indication could, of course, be an off-label use. It could be an error as well, and that's why it's grouped under an issue term here. Intentional use for an unlabeled indication could also be a decision by the patient. So intentional product use issue, again, a very vague term, not capturing the fact that we are looking at an off-label incidence, and that's why off-label use in unapproved indication would be the correct assignment here. Here we are. LLT off-label use in unapproved indication under PT off-label use. Questions, Jane?
Yes, we have a couple of questions, Caroline. I think you've covered some of these just in your last couple of sentences. Is there no need in this example to capture the prescription status?
No, not in this instance, because it's an off-label use in unapproved indication. We don't know whether the drug was finally administered or so. So it's clear that it comes from the HCP because it's an off-label use. And either the doctor recommended it for an unapproved indication or prescribed it for an unapproved indication, but we have no hint that it was finally used or administered for an unapproved indication. So it's sufficient this way. Usually you should try to capture the general classification. So as a medication error, a use issue, a misuse, intentional misuse by the patient, or an off-label use, you should capture this information. And only when it comes to the to the medications errors, product use errors, and the then you are asked to really capture and split code, because these are the incidents the regulators are looking at. Off-label use in unapproved indication is fully sufficient here.
Now we have a question about used, the term used. If it was only prescribed and not used, but we've coded it as used, so is it okay to code with the term that says used? This goes back to what the comment you said before, Caroline, what use means.
Use is a more general term. It does not mean that it was finally administered. It's just used as such in the whole medication process, in the use process of the medicinal product or medication. And it does not say that it was administered at the end.
Then we've got a question about off-label use, and is off-label use always an unapproved indication?
No, it could be off-label use with a change of the dose, or as I've shown earlier, you see these LLTs, these LLTs here, off-label dosing frequency, dosing amount, age group, indication, route of administration, also off-label vaccine use, so off-label dosing as well. So you have the possibility to really make a difference in terms of the type of deviation from the label that was decided by the healthcare professional for therapeutic purposes. So you would, of course, always try to code as specifically as possible here.
Thank you, Caroline. And the other couple I've addressed in text, so I'll let you carry on because I know you're getting close to time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's the last example. Doctor mixed up the drug names because they look similar and prescribed the wrong medication. So again, do we know whether this was accidental or intentional? Yes, we know it was accidental. We know who caused it. It was the doctor, and in the context of therapeutic use. We also know the stage where the error occurred. It was the prescribing stage. And here we also know that a root cause was mentioned. So again, a question for you, the last one. How would you approach this verbatim now? Doctor mixed up the drug names because they look similar and prescribed the wrong medication. Wrong drug administered, wrong drug prescribed, wrong drug, product confusion, drug name lookalike, drug prescription issue. Consider split coding as well in this case here. I have to speed up a little bit, sorry for that. Let me show where you're going. Wrong drug prescribed and drug name lookalike are your favorites, and this is fully correct. Let me show you again in the decision chart. So we know that this occurred unintentionally, accidentally. It was caused by the doctor in the framework of the therapeutic use of the product. So it is a medication error. And I will not go demonstrate it in the browser, but will demonstrate it here with these screenshots from the MedDRA browser. So let's review the LLTs. Wrong drug is too vague. It could relate to all different stages in the medication use process. Here it was reported that a wrong drug was prescribed. Wrong drug administered would assume that this error reached the patient. This was not reported. The error may have been prevented from reaching the patient. We don't know. We were just told doctor mixed up the drug names because they look similar and prescribed the wrong medication. That's all that we know. Product confusion would again be too vague. We have a better and more specific term in MedDRA for capturing the root cause here. That is drug name lookalike. Wrong drug prescribed is the correct LLT to be selected to capture the stage where the error occurred and the specific type of error. And LLT drug prescription issue again is too vague because we know that the wrong drug was prescribed in error. So we would want to capture the accidental nature of this deviation from the authorized product information. So here we are, LLT wrong drug prescribed under PT product prescribing error, and drug name lookalike LLT under PT product name confusion. These would be the correct assignments, and most of you have voted for them, so well done again. Any questions, Jane?
No, Caroline, no questions, just some appreciative feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. So here the summary of what we have covered today. if there are no questions, let me continue here some helpful links also to our training schedule page and to the MedDRA support documentation. This is our webinar today. You can see that these webinars for coding of medication errors are also provided in different languages like Chinese and French, for instance. And this is the contact page on the MedDRA website. If you click on this hyperlink here, contact, then this page will open and you can see that you can not only reach us via the help desk, but you can follow us on social media. We have social media channels. You can also contact us via the contact form and by a live chat as well. And what may be helpful for you is the YouTube channel. And this is what I wanted to show you. Here we are. Here is our website. Here is the contact. If I click on it, the page that you just saw opens. And if I click on the YouTube icon here, then you see all the recorded sessions, all the recorded trainings of the different trainers and the different topics that they have covered, also in different languages. You see Spanish, Chinese, Russian. We also have Korean, French ones, Korean. So all of them are available, so you can watch them if you cannot make it to a webinar, or if you would like to listen to a webinar provided by a different trainer, then please refer to this YouTube channel. And what I wanted to show you here is that we also have recorded sessions of workshops. So if you are interested in more examples on medication errors, you can watch these webinars here, the recorded sessions provided by myself and Jane, but also by our US colleague Dave. So if you would like to learn more, see more examples, then please refer to these recorded sessions. And with this, I hope that you found this webinar helpful for your work, and hope also to meet you again in one of our coming MSSO webinars, or also in one of the face-to-face trainings. Thank you for joining today, and also a big thank you to you, Jane, for your support as always, for handling all the questions. Enjoy the rest of your day, and also a warm goodbye to you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Caroline. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.